have a seat, and when you're settled, and you can move the microphone away from your mouth so the jury can hear you. And as long as your full name is well left, you can move the microphone easier than the chair.
Yeah, a little bit easier this way. Tony Evans, EVANS.
Thank you. What is your current occupation?
I'm currently employed at the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been there?
Over 26 years.
In what capacity were you working with the Van Buren County Sheriff's Department on January 7th of 2007?
I was a K-9 deputy.
You were a pardon me, a what?
A K-9 deputy.
K-9 deputy. K-9 meaning you have a dog.
Yes.
And were you dispatched to a fire on that day at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon?
I was.
And do you recall the location?
The 66,000 block of County Road 215.
Is that in Lawrence Township?
It is.
Van Buren County, state of Michigan?
Yes.
Do you recall approximately how long it took you from the time you were dispatched till the time you got to the property?
About 7 minutes.
And were you the first emergency responder or law enforcement to arrive?
I was the first law enforcement. There was a firefighter, first responder that was there before me.
Do you recall who that was?
Steve Leach.
What did you observe when you first arrived at the home?
So when I pulled in a long dirt driveway, heading back to the west to a two-story yellow home, I pulled in, it parked off to the right about 3/4 of the way down. I saw heavy smoke on the north side of the residence. It was going up and a little bit to the north. Then I saw flames on the south side and smoke coming out of the second story windows.
How long was that driveway approximately?
Approximately 250 yards.
Was it a flat driveway? Did it angle up?
If I remember, it had just a little incline going up to it, to the west.
You said that you saw the smoke going up. I think you used your hands in a motion to show going up. Was there any smoke coming out of the sides of the home?
I don't remember any smoke coming out of the sides. I remember coming out of the second floor. It was pretty clear, actually.
So coming down the drive, you could clearly see the sides of the houses?
Yes.
Could you clearly see the yard?
Yes.
And you said you saw fire in the second story?
There was fire on the south side of the residence that I could plainly see. There's also some smoke. There was heavy smoke on the north side of the residence.
What were the weather conditions at that time?
When I pulled in there, I don't remember it raining. It was cloudy, a little overcast. Eventually it did start to rain though, sometime down I'm not sure the time frame of it when it started to rain. But
Sometime after you
sometime
arrived, it
after I
started to
arrived,
rain?
correct.
And then did the weather change from the rain?
Went from light rain to heavy rain to snow.
And that was later on?
Yes, it was later on.
Would that have been after it was dark?
Remember it raining, so it was about 3:37, 3:46, if I remember correctly.
When you got there, correct?
When I got there. January of that time, I'm not sure exactly what time it got dark out. Obviously it gets dark out earlier in January here in Michigan. So I think it was maybe light out when it started raining as well.
Do you have any problems going down that 250-yard driveway?
I did not.
And then how far down the driveway did you get before you parked?
About 3/4 way down, I parked off facing the north.
And why did you park before the house?
I knew that first responders would be showing up, fire department, so I pulled off that way because it looked like there was only one ingress or egress going to that residence.
And then did you walk then from your car to the residence?
I did.
Do you recall the condition of the driveway as you were walking on it?
It seemed fine to me.
And then as you approached the house, what did you see?
So I saw subjects on the north side of the residence. About 5 people on the north side of the residence. I walked up there and they were attending to Mr. Stermer.
So I want to stop you real quick with on the north side of the property. Can you give the jury an explanation of what the terrain is on the north side and how that house is situated with the terrain?
So terrain-wise, it was a grass with a slight slope going down. And then it looked like there was maybe a driveway that they used to pull around to the back of the house at some point, but that would have been dirt.
And so then did the terrain go, did it go all the way down to then the lower level?
It dipped down to the west.
And so where were the people that you saw situated in like with that terrain?
About 20, yep, there's a green fuel oil tank that was there. So they're about 20, 25 yards to the north, maybe northwest from there.
And were they on the slope down that you described?
I don't remember being on a slope down, no.
Okay. You know what I mean when I'm talking about the yard sloping down?
Yeah,
Were
we weren't on the slope, no.
Okay, so you were
More
up
the flat part.
higher?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall who was on scene there? You said there were several people when you arrived.
Mike Matheny, Connie Calhoun, Steve Leach, who was from the fire department, Dr. Masali was a neighbor, and Linda Stermer.
And what did you do then when you first arrived and saw this group of people?
I went over there, noted there that Mr. Stermer was on the ground. I noted Linda Stermer was laying on top of him or on top of him.
I want to stop you there. So she was laying on top of him?
Well, she was on top of him.
And can you describe how she was on top of him?
So he was laying down, and she was, I'd say, knees to the side of him.
Straddling him?
With his head. Can I show you real quick?
Yeah, would that help if you,
Probably.
could you come down and show the jury then how she was?
So he was laying down here on the floor, and then his head
Can you
over
hear?
here.
Can I just give you that?
Oh,
Oh, come on.
so he was laying
Here,
down.
she's been using a microphone, sorry.
So he was laying down on the ground. Say this is him, and there's his head. She had her knees here, and she was down like this on top of him,
And where was his head?
right here.
So she was face to face. Were her legs straddling his body?
No,
So she was to the side of him,
the
but
side
then
of him.
face to face with him.
correct.
How close was she to him?
She was on top of him.
Thank you. Could you tell at that time if Todd Stermer was still alive?
He did have labored breathing.
And when you say labored breathing, what do you mean by that?
His breathing was shallow.
Shallow? Was he responsive?
No,
Did you hear him say anything?
no, I did not.
What did you observe about Todd Stermer and any injuries?
I know he had burns on his face, his arms. He appeared to be severely burned. His ears, you could see some cartilage on it. He did have a laceration to the back of his head that was bleeding.
And did you see blood anywhere other than the back of his head?
He also had lacerations to the back of him.
Was there any blood on the ground?
Yes.
And where was that blood?
The blood was where he was sitting, where he's laying on the ground.
Was he clothed at that time?
He was not clothed. He did have a pair of sweatpants and his socks on. I'm not sure if he had underwear on at that time, but they were wrapped around his ankles. And there was a plaid, looked like a jacket of some sort that was laying over his private area. There was also other clothes that were bunched up down by his feet.
By his feet?
Yes.
And did you ask the defendant, Linda Stermer, what had happened?
I did ask her what happened, and she didn't respond.
Did you ask her if anybody else was in the home?
I did.
Did she respond to that?
After a couple of times, she said no, or she shook her head no, and then said there may be some cats.
What was the defendant doing then when she was on the ground?
She was saying his name, Todd.
Was anyone else attending to Todd at that time?
There was the previous people I spoke of were around him. Dr. Masali was there as well. He was attempting to attend to him as well. At some point, we had to actually take Linda off of Todd and move her so we could do immediate care.
So when you say you had to take her off, what do you mean by that?
Had to hold on to her and physically tell her to get off so we could go ahead and attend to
So
Todd.
that you could do what?
Attend to Todd.
And when you say attend to, do you mean then administer aid?
Administer aid, yes.
And at that point, he still has the labored breathing?
Yes.
Did the ambulance arrive then?
An ambulance arrived at some point, yes. Well, no, I think that it was not there at that time, no. There was no ambulance at that time.
Did you attempt to administer any aid at that time?
So we were close to the house, and the house was on fire. There's a large green fuel tank that was on the north side of the residence. So I was worried for other first responders, everybody on scene. So tried to make the decision to move Todd further away from the scene. The decision was made between, I'm not sure among all of us, was to find something to move Todd. Because I went to try to move him, and as I grabbed him, so I tried to grab him under his arms and kind of like a fireman carry, see if I could bring him back. But due to his skin slippage, I was unable to do that. I then attempted to try and grab his arms, and maybe I could pull him that way, and the skin came off of his arms and went down towards his hands.
Were you able to find something then to try to move him?
One of the persons there, we found like a molded sled, like a plastic sled or some sort.
A plastic sled?
Yeah. From what I recall, it's like a molded sled. I can't even tell you what color it was. It was
Just
so
made of
fast.
plastic?
That's my recollection. It was probably plastic.
And once you found that sled, what did you do?
So we moved Todd up, slid him into the sled, and then moved him about 100, 125 yards to the northeast, away from the fire scene.
And once you got him moved, did other people arrive?
Yes.
And who arrived?
So the fire department arrived, the ambulance arrived after a little bit there. I also got a hold of my sergeant. I relayed stuff on the radio to him about for him to respond to the scene. Also, Deputy Gary Gruss from the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office arrived. When he arrived, I asked him to grab a CPR mask because after we moved him, and got him up in that corner over there, he stopped breathing.
So did you attempt to administer any other aid at that point, or did they take over then with the CPR mask?
We all began doing CPR and compressions. I think it was 3 or 4 of us that did it. Coloma EMS, if I remember correctly, was on the scene. They asked us to continue doing that until he was pronounced.
And so at that time, he had stopped his labored breathing, but you were still continuing CPR?
Yes, and as we tried to do CPR on him, no more air would go into his mouth.
Did you observe the Ford Ecoline van at any time on scene?
I did.
And when did you first notice that?
It was after tending to the medical aid of Mr. Stermer. I saw a Ford Econoline van at the south side of the resident, or I'm sorry, the west, well, that would be the west side of the residence, so behind the residence, with the front facing south.
So, and I just for directionally challenged people like myself, the north side would be to the right of the house, correct?
So if I'm going down the driveway and I'm looking at the house, the right side is the north, the left side is the south.
So
straight ahead would be west.
Straight ahead would be west. So the Mr. Stermer and everybody were to the right on the north side when you first arrived.
Yes.
And then the van was in the rear of the home?
Yes.
And was it facing towards the victim and towards the people, or was it facing away from?
It was facing away.
Anything you observed unusual about that van in the backyard?
It was running. I could see smoke coming from the tailpipe.
How close was it to the home?
It's fairly close, maybe 5 to 7 yards.
And it was still running?
Yes.
When you talked about moving Todd, where did you move him to, now that we have a better concept of direction?
So when we moved him, if we're facing the house, coming up the driveway to the north, and then a little bit back to the east.
So kind of
it's coming
farther,
back at me.
coming towards the backyard.
Yep.
Were you there when the medical examiner arrived?
I was, yes.
At that point, once the medical examiner had arrived, was Todd pronounced dead at that time?
I believe so, yes.
Once he was pronounced dead, did you have an opportunity to see his injuries a little bit more thoroughly?
Yes.
And how much of his body was burnt?
I would say 70%.
And you talked about skin slippage. Where was the skin slippage?
So on his arms, down by his hands, so the skin peeled off and went down towards his hands. He also had some skin slippage up when I tried to grab him up by the shoulder area.
And you talked about the lacerations and I believe some injuries you saw on the back. Is this the time that you saw the injuries then on the back?
Yeah, I noted there was a lot of blood when we moved him. And during the time of the CPR and looking at him, there's a large pool of blood when we moved him from the area where he was laying down. Brought him over there, and once we were doing our medical assessment of him, he was still bleeding from his head, and then he had some lacerations as well on his back.
Your Honor, I believe that defense counsel has stipulated to People's Exhibit Number 1, which includes It would include items, pictures 1 through 27, so we've labeled them all 1. So it'll be 1-1, 1-2, 1-3. And I believe we have a stipulation to admit these photos.
Any objections?
No objection, you stipulate, Your Honor.
Okay, so we will see in the elementary, was exhibit, 127, 127.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes. And thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to hand you the stack of photos that's been admitted as People's Exhibit number 1, just so that you can follow along as we talk about them from the jury.
Okay.
So this is 1-1, and I just want to point out for the record that it's evidenced by the number 1 at the bottom right corner, just for the ability to keep the record clean. Can you tell the jury what we're looking at in item 1-1?
So that appears to be where Mr. Stermer was laying originally before being moved. I also, it was marked with a flag as well.
So the flags were used for what purpose?
So the weather started getting bad, started raining, then started heavy raining, then it started to sleet, and then it started to snow. So the reason I used the flags was to mark where he was at, and I also saw some tire impressions on what appeared to be from the van going through the grass and back to the van.
And did you also mark the tire impressions?
I did, yes.
So I'm going to ask you, if you see places where you've marked tire impressions, if you could also then describe that to the jury.
On Exhibit 1.
Did you see any on Exhibit 1?
I see one other flag, but I'm not sure on this picture here.
Okay, I'll have you go to number 2 then. And can you describe to the jury what we're looking at here?
So number 2 is where Mr. Stermer was laying.
And can you tell by this picture then in relation to any tire tracks?
There are some tire tracks next to the flag there.
And would that be then towards the kind of in a diagonal from the left to the right?
Yes.
That would be the tire track? Would that be the tire track?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to have you then go to 1-3. Could you describe for the jury what we're looking at here?
So that's where Mr. Stermer was laying. The 2 flags depict the tire tracks going I'm trying to orient myself on that.
Would it help to give you the pointer?
No, I can see
Okay,
it on here.
okay.
I got it. So the 2 flags are representative of where the tire tracks were.
So I'm going to point out, so we have the orange flag and the red flag, those are the tire tracks. Can you see on the screen where I'm touching them?
Yeah, the first flag is depicting where, so the one on the left is depicting where Mr. Stermer was laying.
Okay.
The one past it, and it might be better with
On the next
the
picture?
next photographs.
Okay.
But that could be possibly where the other tire track was.
Okay, and then I want to then the darkened area immediately to the right of the flag. What is that? Can you see where I'm pointing?
That is blood.
Okay, and that's where Todd Stermer was laying?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to have you go then to the next photo. Okay. And can you describe what we're looking at here?
That's another picture of where Mr. Stermer was laying.
And then any tire track, is this the same tire track?
Yes.
I'm going to go to the next slide, which I believe will be 5. What are we looking at here?
So I think you can see the van in the background there. And if you look at the tire tracks, the one on the left and right, that is a tire track moving back towards the van.
So were you able to follow the tracks from where you first saw them to then the van that you found?
Yes,
And is this a progression of pictures as you're approaching the van?
it is.
Okay. So I'm going to go then to photo number 6, 1-6. What are we looking at here?
The picture, pretty much the same as the other one, depicting where the tire tracks were.
And are you just walking closer to the van at this
Correct.
time?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to go to 1-7. What are we looking at here?
Uh, 1-7 is depicting where the two flags are, where the tire tracks are going back behind the house.
And again, then also where the victim was located?
Yes.
I'm going to go to 1-8. And what are we looking at here?
It's just another photo depicting where the tire tracks are going to the back of the house.
And in this photo, we can see part of the house, is that correct?
Correct.
And so if we're looking at the house from this angle, what side of the house is that?
This is the north side.
So if I'm going down the driveway, this would be the right-hand side of the house,
Correct.
and just looking back up at it.
Yes.
I'm going to go to 1-9, and what are we looking at here?
That is a picture of the van.
And where was this again located?
On the west side of the residence, behind the house.
Behind the house. I'm going to go to 1-10. What are we looking at here?
Another picture of the van.
1-11.
So that's going to be a picture facing east, taking a passenger side picture of the van.
And so this is also showing part of the house. Again, what part of the house are we looking at here?
The south side.
And that would be the back side of the
Oh,
house?
sorry, the west side. That would be the west side.
The west side, which is the back of the house?
Yes.
Would that be the lower level? Is that the walkout level?
I would assume so. I never went in it. So.
And I'm going to go to 1-12. And if you could just describe what we're looking at here.
Another picture depicting where the van was on the west side behind the house.
And the lighted up area obviously is still where the fire is occurring?
I'm not sure on that.
Okay. Do you know what the lighted area is?
I do not.
Okay. I'm going to go to 1-13. And what are we looking at here?
That's another picture of the van behind the house.
1-14. I see. Did you put a flag on this picture?
I did.
And why do you have a flag on this picture?
So when I was looking at the van, I noticed that on the brush guard, there appeared to be blood on it.
And when you say the brush guard, what do you mean by the brush guard?
So below the chrome bumper, there was a plastic brush guard, and there appeared to be blood on it.
And that's what the flag is depicting?
Correct.
I'm going to go to 1-15. What are we looking at here?
That's another picture of the van with the flag near it, and you can kind of see a little bit of red to the right of the flag, and that is the blood that I saw.
So I'm going to go to the right of the flag,
Right on the brush guard there.
right there where I'm pointing.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go to 1-16. What are we looking at here?
That's a picture of the driver's side of the van.
So your back would have been to the house at this
I would have been at
direction?
the house at this time, yes.
Go to 1-17. What are we looking at here?
That's the front of the van straight on, So I'd have been facing the north, the van was facing the south. Where the flag is, to the left of it, there's a red mark, and that's what I believe to be blood on the van.
I'm going to go to 1-18. What is this?
That's another picture of the front of the van, where that previous flag was, and then what appears to be blood on the brush guard.
So just a close-up from the
Another
last picture.
close-up, yeah.
I'm going to go to 119. Is this another
That's
further
another
close-up?
close-up of the same.
I'm going to go to 1-20.
Another close-up of the same of what I saw.
1-21. Do you know what it is we're looking at here?
So, if you see, kind of faint, but there's some flags out there. So if you go to the top, I don't know if you can see it from there. There's like 1, 2, 3 flags that I can see.
Are they red?
They're red.
So
that would be where the tire impression would be.
Am I pointing to the first one?
That would be on this side. So it would be on the north side.
Okay,
And
that's
the
one of
other-
the flags?
That's one of the flags, and then on the other side would have been the south side flags.
Okay, and then these 2 flags here?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to mark is where you could see the tire impressions going to the van. Again, it was pouring rain, getting hard, and freezing rain and a little bit of snow.
So at that time, you're just trying to make sure that you get the property marked?
I'm just trying to preserve it with whatever I had at the time.
I'm going to go to 1-22. And what are we looking at here?
So what I'm trying to depict there is if you look on the left, there's the flags going kind of rounded back towards the van. So on the right side, you can see the flags going back towards the van. The left side, flags going back towards the van. So trying to capture how the van went around and parked.
So you were able to then, let me ask you this way, were you able to see where the van started and where it ended?
Initially, yes.
And you were able to follow that entire path?
Yes, I followed it from, not necessarily all the way from the front, but where I could see some tire impressions, I followed that to go around to the back of the van on that north side of the house.
Do you know how much you could see prior to Mr. Stermer's body? How much of the tire tracks you could see prior?
It wasn't a heavy impression. It was just a mild impression. It's like someone drove through your grass.
Was the ground more solid there?
At the time, the ground was more solid. There may have been just a little bit. It may have rained there before. I don't know. I'm not sure if it rained there before. But there was just a little bit of mud.
And then you were able to then track it up to the point of Mr. Stermer's body,
Yes.
and then you were able to track them going to the backyard.
Yes.
Was this a fluid track? Meaning, did you see any detours off of that curve?
I did not know.
Okay. So you were able to follow it in a pretty smooth curve.
Yes.
I'm going to go then to 1-23. What are we looking at here?
Again, depicting where the tire tracks were leading to the van.
And that's donated by the red flags?
Correct.
1-24.
The same thing. I think just a little bit better angle. I think you can see a little more on this picture where the flags are going back towards the van.
And I want to ask you, are those flags going in 2 separate lines?
Correct.
So the flags on what would be more in the middle of the screen, those would have been,
The flags are near the tire tracks, yes.
and so let me ask you this way. So you're marking two sets of tire tracks?
Two sets of tire tracks.
The left side,
left
the
and
driver's
right.
side, and the passenger
Correct.
side? Okay.
And in this picture, you can see where there's some, looks like some medical supplies that might have been left out, some gloves or something. It looks like right there, that's where Mr. Stermer was laying.
Okay, when you say right there,
On the left side,
left side,
above that white.
above this white?
So go above that, and right there,
So right above the white,
yes.
that's where, what is that?
It looks like that's where Mr. Stermer was laying.
And when you're talking about medical supplies, what are you talking about?
Gloves. Gloves, and maybe that was a bandage that I probably grabbed out of my car.
Okay. I'm going to go to 1-25. What are we looking at here?
It's another picture depicting the tire tracks and showing where Mr. Stermer was laying.
And again, I just want to be clear, there's two straight lines of flags, correct?
Correct.
And so the ones then on the left would be the driver's side, and the ones on the right would be the passenger side.
Yes.
I'm going to go to 1-26.
It's depicting pretty much the same thing. I think you can vaguely see the van up on the left-hand side there.
At the top of the photo?
At the top of the photo, yes.
So the van, is that the van there
Correct.
at the top?
Yes.
I'm going to go to 1-27. And what are we looking at here?
That's another photo depicting the tire tracks.
And I believe that is the last photo. Did you take any injuries of any photos of Mr. Stermer's injuries?
I did not.
After you had taken the pictures, mapped everything out, at some point were the detectives called?
Yes, I called my sergeant at the time, Verge Franks. I asked him to come out. He came out, and the decision was made to call our detective bureau in.
And who did you call?
Detective Maciowski, Detective Rout, Lieutenant Stump.
And you had mentioned that the medical examiner had arrived at some point.
Yes.
Do you recall who that was?
Amy Darling.
Did the fire department arrive while you were present?
Yes.
Were you able to obtain information about that van that was in the yard still running?
Yes, by running it through the Secretary of State system.
Did you determine who owned the van?
I believe it was owned by the Stermers. I'm not sure what name it's registered into, but
What was done with the van?
that was towed.
Do you know where it was taken?
I believe it was taken to Decatur Towing.
And why was it taken there?
The decision was made by the detectives to preserve the van for evidence and continue on.
Was the rain concerning at that time?
It was, yes.
At that point, did you continue on with the investigation, or did the detectives take over?
The detectives took over.
After they took over and started their investigation, did you receive any physical evidence from the Detective Bureau?
I got some clothing that was given to me by Detective Maciowski and Sergeant Franks.
And were you aware of whose clothing or what that clothing was at that time?
I was not.
And what was done with that clothing?
It was wet. Might have been some blood on it. I was asked to go take it to our crime lab at the sheriff's office and hang it up.
And why
Dry
would you
out.
dry it out? Was that the reason it was hung up?
Yes.
And you said it was bloody and wet.
When I hung it up, I noticed there was some wetness on it and some blood, yes.
And then was that in a secure area that it was hung up?
Yes.
After you moved Mr. Stermer away from the house, were you able to then show the detectives where he first was located by you?
Yes, I did.
And at that time, was everything flagged for them?
So when I put the flags out there, but there's also other first responders on that north side. And I think one of the pictures here, it shows a tire track kind of going off. I believe that is to a first responder vehicle. That's not related to the tracks that I saw going to the Ford Econoline van.
And then did you inform the detectives of everything that you had seen?
I did.
And then was the scene secured for that evening?
Yes, it was.
And how was it secured?
I believe the detectives called the police to secure it and waiting on the fire marshal.
And the fire marshal, did they secure it until the fire marshal arrived?
To my knowledge, yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Just have a few questions. I want to go over some of what you observed when you got to the scene. First of all, you said that you saw Linda and you showed us she was kneeling over Todd.
Correct.
She was screaming his name, wasn't she?
She was yelling Todd, yes.
She was hysterical, essentially. Right?
She was yelling his name, yes. And
Loudly?
Loudly, yes.
Out of control?
Wouldn't say out of control, but yeah, she was yelling his name, Todd, 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 over and over.
Did you help get her off of
Yes.
him? You were looking at some of the photos, and we saw the photos of the blood on the ground. You remember that?
Correct, yes.
And comparing it to the tire tracks. Right?
Yes.
There was no blood that you observed at the scene on the tires themselves. Is that right?
I didn't observe it on the tires, no.
In fact, we saw the blood on the bumper. Remember that? The brush guard, you called it.
Yes.
And the brush guard is about, what, 10 inches off the ground?
I'm not 100% sure how far up that is, but
Roughly?
roughly,
Okay. 10 inches off the ground, and it was inside the tire, wasn't it?
yes.
All right. You didn't see any evidence of any blood on the vehicle itself that would suggest the tire impacted Todd, fair?
Yeah, I did not know.
The Econoline van was taken to Decatur towing, and you had nothing to do with it after that?
I had nothing to do with it, no.
The clothing that you took, did you know it was Linda Stermer's clothing?
I don't recall if I was told that by Verge Franks or by Masiowski.
One way or another, you don't know.
One way or another, I don't know at this time.
But you took it to the crime lab, right?
Correct.
And you stored it personally in some area?
So the sheriff's office has a secure crime lab area. So you could go in there and you can hang up stuff, any type of evidence. They do fingerprints in there if they were trying to get lien prints off of an item. If you were a crime technician, etc.
Are you a crime technician?
In 2002, I went to a basic 35-hour class that covered basic crime scene.
Okay. In 2007, January 7, 2007, you were not a crime scene technician for the Van Buren County Sheriff's, fair?
Well, I would get called out sometimes to do fingerprints, basic stuff, castings of a tire, but any advanced crime scene technician, no.
Okay. Were you aware of the policies of the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office with respect to how evidence is stored and secured?
I'd imagine I was at that time.
You can't just tell us as you sit here today, fair?
Fair.
And you don't know, well, you didn't separately bag any of the evidence, did you?
I did not.
All right, you just kept it and stored it in the room together as you found it.
I hung it up separately, yes. I noted it in a report.
But you don't know the way you hung it up and where you stored it was in compliance with the Sheriff's Office policies and procedures, fair?
Fair.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Just briefly, Your Honor. You never had the opportunity to examine underneath the van, did you?
I did not know.
And you're trained as to how to store evidence, correct?
Yes.
And you have policies and procedures on how to store evidence.
Yes.
And that was the secured area that the evidence was put into, correct?
Correct.
And did you follow the policies and procedures at that time of how to handle evidence?
Objection form. Leading.
I did, yes.
Thank you. I
To
know
my
that.
knowledge, I did, yes.
As an officer, do you review policy and procedures?
Yes.
And are you informed by command staff of what policy and procedures are?
Yes.
And do you follow policy and procedures as given to you?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
When I asked you just a second ago, were you aware of the policy of securing and storing the evidence on January 7, 2007? You told me you didn't know, right?
I did not know the actual policy procedure on that date. No, I
Okay.
did not.
You generally you were aware of the policies, how you're supposed to do it,
Correct, yes.
but as you did those pieces of clothing, you don't know if they complied with the Sheriff's Office policy,
I
fair?
do not know at that time, yes.
Thank you.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Jurors, do you have any questions of this witness? I've got a couple hands going up, so if you have already, please write down your questions or retrieve them. I have some questions from the jury, sir. No objection from counsel. First one is, do you know if the van was stuck behind the house or merely parked, just if you know?
It did not appear to be stuck. It appeared to be parked.
Okay. Were the tire tracks on the dirt drive around the house? Were they on the dirt drive around the house?
It was on a grass dirt area. I don't know if that's what they use as their drive or not.
Okay. Any blood, mud trail, or drag marks from Todd to the house prior to moving him?
Not that I saw, no.
Okay, thank you. Counsel, do you have any questions in light of my questions and answers? Inside of me?
I would just like to follow up one.
Yeah, did
Unless
you have any-
counsel has a question.
Okay.
Sir, that second question had to do with tire tracks around what you call the dirt drive. It wasn't even a driveway, right?
It looks like maybe they use that to drive around to the back of their house.
Did you see any tire tracks? Strike that. If you had seen that, you would have measured that off and flagged it, right?
If I would have saw, yes, I would have flagged that off,
You
yes.
didn't notice anything?
I did not know.
Thank you.
I just want to be clear, when you talk about the drive around, what material was that? Was it dirt? Was it
Grass,
grass?
dirt, there was no concrete, gravel, anything like that that I recall.
So was it mainly grass?
Objection, call, speculate.
How much of it was grass?
I'm not sure
Okay.
how much was grass.
Okay. Were there any defined tracks that you were able to say that this was something that was used in the past?
Not that I recall.
Okay. I have no further questions.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Jury, do you have any other questions of him in light of what's happened, the latest questions? Okay, you do, ma'am? Is it written down yet? Okay, we'll retrieve it from you. Sir, another question from the jury. When you first saw Todd, do you know if he was laying on his back or stomach? when
He
you
was
found
on his
him?
back.
I'm sorry?
On his back.
Okay. Counsel, any questions in light of that question and answer?
Go ahead. You have a question?
Sir, I think you said you were about the fifth person to arrive? Fifth?
There is
Masali,
Masali,
Matheny,
Matheny,
Calhoun, and Leach before you.
Correct.
And Linda.
That I remember, yes.
Okay. So you're the fifth person. You don't know how long it was from the time Todd Stermer was first found by Mr. Matheny to the time you got there, fair?
I do not know.
So when you got there, he was on his back, fair?
Yes.
And you don't know what had transpired with respect to Matheny, Masali, and Ms. Calhoun before that, right?
Correct.
In terms of whether he was on his back or he was on his face, fair?
Fair. When I arrived, he was on his back.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, jury? No questions? May he be excused from his subpoena, counsel?
I would ask that he be excused, Your Honor.
Do you want him to, are you okay with him being excused from subpoena? Okay, thank you. Okay, sir, you're all done.
Thank you.
I'll take those exhibits. Jury, we'll take our lunch break now. I'll have you return directly, thank you, to the jury room at 1:30. And please remember the instructions. Do not talk about the case with anyone or allow anyone to talk about it with you. Do not watch any media reports